I was wondering if I could ask you about, I mean, I'm so curious now that we've kind of talked about the difference between the era you're describing, where almost bent over backwards to accommodate communities and town councils and city councils, and now this era where it seems to be different. But to me, the MTC project, which was one of your last ones, right? I think that
Mhm.
you described, to me, that's kind of pivotal because, and I can't remember exact heights or anything, you can go into that, but the neighborhood of predominantly LDS said, please don't here. I remember them flying a giant balloon, and they obviously, in whatever they did, had an impact, because whatever you guys did, it wasn't what was originally planned. So I'd love to hear more about that, how community outreach and trying to help the church understand what the impact might be, it seemed to work in that situation.
Yeah, it was, if we're talking about impacting a community, probably the poster child for how to do this right is the expansion of the Provo Missionary Training Center. Um, Built mostly in the early 70s and then added onto with a couple of additional buildings over the years. Um, it sits in the midst of a very residential neighborhood, homes built in the 60s and 70s, maybe back even into the 50s, that had been occupied by, the most stalwart and faithful Latter-day Saints, many of them, former BYU professors or current BYU professors or their widows. It's just, that was the community. And at the time that this all started in 2012-ish, I'm thinking, Brigham Young University facilities management, physical facilities, had been maintaining and operating the MTC plant for dozens and dozens of years. And when it came time to talk about expanding the MTC, it was a Brigham Young University physical facilities project. And they came forward with a project recognizing that there was a limited amount of ground at the Missionary Training Center and a significant boost in program that they were being asked to consider. They proposed an 11-story tower in the middle of the facility.
I was thinking 8, and I thought even that was wrong. It was
No,
11. Oh my
we're
goodness.
we're talking about a place where
Yeah.
maximum height of buildings were three
Yeah.
short stories, kind of tucked in amongst a lot of story and a half tall houses with low slung
Mhm.
mid-century modern roofs.
Yeah. The
and
70s, 60s houses.
and
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, an 11-story tower, which would have been taller than anything anywhere in Utah County, I think, and would have been more prominent than now former Provo Temple that sat high up on the hill above the MTC.
I remember them saying, our gardens won't grow anymore. You don't understand the shadow. It was just so massive.
Well, the community, as you've alluded to, Rebecca, came out in force against their neighbor and their faith tradition, the institutional church.
Wow.
I scratched my head when I heard about this the first time. I thought, 11 stories, that means you've got missionaries on stairs or in elevators constantly. And just the vertical transportation issues of an 11-story building for, 20,000 missionaries was not a good idea. It was a
Yeah.
bad idea. And yes, of course, I'm not so sure that people's gardens would have been shadowed that badly, but it was the wrong thing to do.
Right.
And all of the hoo-ha that took place, and in this case again, the right creates might attitude that Brigham Young University took towards their surrounding community, ultimately caused church headquarters to take the project away from BYU and give it to physical facilities at church headquarters, which became me, director of special projects at that point. And so I inherited all the bad will, all the ill will that BYU had created. And so we started a process as we were developing our guidelines to design a much more sane and sensitive facility. We started a process where we went down into elementary schools all around the MTC campus and met with the local residents. And they came out in force to talk to all of us new folk who were coming to talk about this project. And before we put any pencil to paper, we held long local community meetings in these elementary school cafeterias and such and libraries, listening to all of these folks share the promises that President Kimball had made to them when the Missionary Training Center was originally built, and all of these things, which, I brought a fair amount of respect to that conversation. And I didn't have a dog in the fight at that point because I wasn't married to a design that we hadn't done yet. I just knew we weren't going to do that 11-story tower. Mm-hmm. And we listened until they believed that we really cared. And we took back to our leadership at headquarters what ultimately became a master plan, which required expanding into, ironically, some of BYU's ancillary facilities, the old laundry and print factory and all of whatever things we wound up taking from BYU and having them build elsewhere, so that the MTC could expand its ground. As it did so downhill. We were able to slip in 5 and then 6-story buildings downhill that when you stood on the roof of those new buildings, you weren't any higher than the roof of the 3-story buildings that were uphill. And so they were away from the neighborhood. They were towards the university campus and tucked in around other existing university buildings in a way that ultimately, from the community's perspective, created a sensitive and beautiful response. And one that really made the whole effort of what's going on inside that facility more of a beacon, to the community, that this is missionary work churning away, but we didn't do it
alienating a community, right?
Yeah, we didn't do it in the face of our neighbors.
Yeah. That's why that's beautiful. But let me just say this really quickly. It makes me really, really devastated for the communities that we work with when you say we listened and listened until they knew that we cared, because none of these communities that we're talking to feel that way at all. They've had lawyers out of the gate threaten them. They've had no representation with any power, no representative with any power come that can listen. And so to hear how it should be done, how it was done, just wish I knew what to do to make it that way again, because I feel like it could be a win-win for everyone. So I love that. I love that you sensed we just have to love everybody until we come up with a solution altogether. And then that reflects the purpose of the MTC. So wonderful story, but really sad to me because that's not what's happening now. Sorry, Landon, go ahead. I just had that thought.
I was going to say basically the same thing you did, but then I was going to ask, what do you say to these residents? Most of these are outside of Utah per se, and most of the residents around are not LDS, and it seems like the church listens when the neighbors are LDS, and it threatens the internal harmony of the church, but they seem to care less when it's residents who are not LDS, and they start labeling them anti-Mormon and bigots simply because they want the same thing the people at the MTC wanted, which is just a livable space with a building that fits in with their community.
Well, listening worked in the non-LDS community of Glendale, Arizona. Yeah. We weren't surrounded by a whole bunch of Latter-day Saint homes there either. I mean, the scenario that I'm describing, whether it's Phoenix Temple or the Provo MTC, it's just good design professionalism, to work in harmony with your context. And your context includes, in certain cases, families in their homes, and businesses in the community, and natural resources like the Thunderbird State Park. That's just good design professionalism, to work in harmony with those things rather than against those things to prove a point.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the answer that they give these residents over and over is God told us to put it here. There's nothing we can do. And
right makes might.
Yes, exactly. That doesn't seem to have been anything that you guys even entertained saying to anybody those years ago, but that is the answer now. And
Yeah.
the residents we work with are like, I don't know what to say to them when they say their God wants to put it here, because whatever you say then starts to sound a little combative, but they're kind of combative to you. So it's really hard to know even how to talk to some of these residents and help them understand the LDS perspective. And I tried to tell them, there's something different going on now. It was not this way before. It really wasn't. But
It
yeah,
really wasn't.
God told us, get in line. I mean, it's that clear, which I don't know how you react to that.